biggest portion coming from civil society, good representation of our colleagues from the UN here in the region. But also, if we cumulate all together, 1/3 of private sector and supporting organizations of private sector. So I think it's a good mix. I'm actually quite pleased to see this. I would have expected this not being so equal, so that is good news. So I think we can have a very meaningful conversation. My colleagues told me I'm not going to do a third poll. It's going to take too much time, but I'm still going to do this. We have one more question for you. I think it's important we know who's in the room, but we also want to understand what's your current temperature this morning. How happy are you? Very simple question. What's the happiness level in the room? I'm going to launch a different poll, and I think Asia Pacific being the region that hosts a country which is measuring the cross happiness product, I think we have a right to ask this question, right? How we are doing? People respond. 60. See, that's an easier question apparently. It goes faster. Okay. Oh, so we are more on the downwards side, which is good. More than 50%, I would say, are happy to very happy. Even some 9s, which is great. So let's make sure we keep the happiness level and move some of the ones that for whom it's maybe early in the morning or late in the evening and needs a bit of a booster. Let's make sure we're gonna get this done with quite an interactive panel this morning. So we know who's in the room. We have a relatively happy audience. I think we're ready to kick in the thematic. And to do this, we're going to start with a little video, just setting a little bit the scene. Watch carefully because we're going to have some more questions after that from your end and want to get your reflections. Here we go. Unmuting would help. So we have learned through some of our research or rapid assessment of the crisis that one of the sectors that actually is benefiting or at least not being so much impacted as others is the technology sector. And so what we're going to do during the session, a little bit of capacity building on technology. So it's not finished yet. So we're going to do one more feedback loop from your end. And I would like to ask you, take your phones or your laptops, menti.com. You're going to need this throughout the session, probably a little bit more. So why don't you all go to menti.com, and there's a code on the screen, 544748, 544748. And what we would like to hear from you is 3 words and no sentences, 3 words, describing the most, what stands most out from watching that video. The intent is to build up a little bit of a word cloud to also see areas that we want to take forward in our conversations where you would like to talk about as well. We're going to be talking about women. We're going to be talking about youth, no worries, empowerment, economy, obviously. Okay. I think you're all in the right panel. I think everything what comes up is going to be discussed. And I think we have done this for a long time now. And I think the panel also deserves to be part of this conversation now. But I think it gives us all a bit more a good view on what areas to highlight and discuss a little bit more in detail. And with this, I'm really gonna not wait much longer and turn it over to the panel. And the first person I'm gonna speak to is actually one of our young entrepreneurs from the Youth Collab. I'm having the pleasure to introduce Lei from the Philippines, and she is an active participant in the Youth Collab. And through the work of her in partnership with the Youth Collab, she has been developing a fabulous enterprise called AI for Government. And I think she went through a journey that she had told to us and we have experienced. This was really a big one and a fast one, and particularly an important one in the current context of COVID. And I would love Lei to share a little bit more about AI for governments. What does it do, and how does it help to build a more inclusive and sustainable society in the Philippines? And also, Lei, please share with us a little bit of your journey as a female and young entrepreneur operating in technology. I think it calls out for lots of barriers, just listening to that, but we would love to hear more about your journey. Over to you, Lei.
Hi everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And I need to holla at the Youth Collab team who are with us. Hi everyone. My name is Lei. So as mentioned, I'm the co-founder of AI for Gov, a GovTech startup dedicated to improve public services using technology, data science, and community organizing. So I think a good context in what we have done is that we started as young civil servants, right? After graduating, you have your first job, and then we were dedicated public servants. But then after our work hours, we're also very dedicated youth leaders. So always active in community building, have several organizations. And I think that's an important a part of our journey, because personally, when you didn't come from a background of privilege, you're not that confident. And youth leadership networks that you expose yourself with allows you to be, from small to have a larger and bigger expansion of networks. And then after a while, you feel more confident. And then after a while, you feel that you can take on challenges. And I think after a few years in youth leadership work, you then start to believe that maybe I can push myself further, we can push ourselves further, you can be introduced with different people. So then I think that was the journey of transformation that I've experienced personally. And to be honest, even speaking English, 3 years ago, I was afraid of, what I call, white people or foreign people. I was afraid to talk to them because I'm not very good at English. But then after a while, when you continue to challenge yourself and expose yourself, then you get to have like, self-discovery. And then if you combine that with elements of your background, for example, my background is in community development experience, which is in public service, and then that self-belief that you've gained along the way about leadership, innovation, bridging divides, and then when you combine that together, and then a youth collab call in the Philippines was published, that there's a call for innovations. We call it Hack Society in the Philippines back in 2018. That was the perfect opportunity to basically combine all of these elements together and attempt to have a project. And then we're just fortunate that in the governance category, of Youth Collab Hack Society in the Philippines, we fit. Our background fit. In fact, the team that we have right now at AA for Gov, we met at different youth leadership networks. So we just combined each other's background, and then voila, we have like a team that are dedicated and coming from a very deep sense of wanting to make impact. And I think that's where we are. So I think that's the context to the background. But then at AA for Gov, after that Youth Collab hack, so we started with saying, maybe we can use chatbots for public services, in information, in providing local government services to the people, because in the Philippines, there's ubiquity in the use of messenger and free data. So we believe very early on that this is a very innovative way of surveying people, of providing information and access. And then from that context, it grew further and further. So first, we were partnering with a single municipality on conducting AI experiments. And then suddenly we are working with the Department of Interior and Local Government, which is regional in the Philippines. And then when COVID came, actually before COVID came, we also were doing emergency response bot, because there was a Taal eruption, a volcano near the capital erupted. So then we made emergency response bots to help our government. And then after that, within a very short period of time, COVID was suddenly like suddenly spiked in the Philippines. So from our Taal eruption bots, we pivoted towards a COVID bot. And then after a few days, we found ourselves pitching to the Department of Health together with bigger tech startups, and we were very, very small at that time. And to point that out, and then once you're now faced with the challenge, and then real world comes in, and then you have other bigger tech startups in the room, then you start becoming, again, at least what I've experienced personally, is that then you begin to have self-doubts. So then we were like having self-doubts at the moment. Can we actually do this? Can we actually do something that is, as big as COVID, as with high risk, but we're a small team. We haven't done this before. But I think the experience was, if we kept on pushing on, we then saw that the products that we're making can actually, be, although we have less experience, the products that we're producing were good. So the government liked it. It was at par with what the bigger tech industries were producing. So then we kept on pushing on. And I suppose because we were public servants before, that gave us a competitive advantage in navigating towards the bureaucracy. So then we started knowing how to build champions and co-ownership inside the government, and having patience, and then pushing on until after a lot of weeks, I think that was 6 weeks since we pitched, then the Department of Health actually announced the partnership. And these are Kira chatbots, or Contra COVID. Contra in the Philippines means fight. So it's like a fight COVID chatbots that allows for self-checking, triaging, digital triaging, that then links to the local governments so that they can assess you and further respond to COVID needs. It allows for fact-checking to mitigate information or fake information. And then it also, we also, together with other tech startups, we built a knowledge base for the Philippines so that the machine can learn from different memorandums that are being published on a daily basis, so that the public can be guided. So, and then after that, within less than a year, so after this, the next project that we're doing is actually now with the Department of Education. So when they heard that we were doing this with the Department of Health, yesterday we pitched and then we got the project. We're now developing mental health triage chatbots in preparation for the school, for COVID, for mental health preparation because of what's happening in the COVID, for for the education sector to be used by the school systems in the Philippines. So I think
sorry, may I interrupt you? I think we will have a bit more of a chance to also talk about really sort of the solutions for COVID in our second round. So I think it's great. I think the audience knows now what the AI for GAF is, and I think it's amazing to listen to your story, and I saw the faces of the other panelists as well. So I think it's incredible how fast you turned this enterprise or adapted this or pivoted this in the current context. We'd love to hear more about the new pitch that you won and how this is impacting Philippine communities in the second round. I realized that I forgot to ask you before we started, making sure that you are at a good happiness level when starting this conversation. So before I hand over to Gaurav, let me just pause here and just see, where are you? I mean, from your talking, I would give you a 15 plus probably right now, but tell me.
Definitely probably 20 plus, because
okay.
We're ecstatic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lei, for this. And I think you have kicked us off in a really passionate way. And I think that shows again why small matters and why we need these passionate entrepreneurs in the region. And I have a second one who I cannot cluster in the category female-led. And sorry, Gaurav, but I have to say you are also not qualifying anymore for a youth entrepreneur. But having said that, your journey and Dharma Life is serving so many women, and Gaurav has an amazing story which I had the privilege to follow over a longer time, starting off as an investment banker and now being a social entrepreneur. And he has been awarded as a global youth leader from the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago, but I think the biggest award he's probably getting from the 50,000 women that he has formed a network of in rural India and helping to improve the life of the people living at the bottom of the pyramid in rural India. Gaurav, with this, I really would like to turn it over to you. First, knowing how you are feeling this morning and if you can keep up with the happiness level of our audience, but also giving us a very honest view. You have been an entrepreneur for a longer time than Lei and in your business, but really sharing with us what kind of barriers and sleepless nights did you have over the past years and particularly last couple of months as well. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Katya. So great to be on this on the panel, and happiness level. Yeah, I mean, early morning here in Germany, and but I mean energized early morning. So happy for sure and excited. So basically, I mean, Dharma Life. I'll briefly explain the model and then how I got to this. So we basically create women entrepreneurs at the village level in rural India. And so we go to these villages, which are typically 500 households and clusters of 1,000 households, so clusters of 2 to 4 villages. We recruit women who don't have a job or need additional income. And then we train them to become social entrepreneurs where they work on various sustainable development goals such as energy access, hygiene, and basically, among other things, health and livelihood programs. Post the training, they work on selling such products and services. You can see on the slide some of the products: so solar lights, water purifiers, clean cooking stoves. They basically sell these products door to door in the village community. They also drive a behavior change through community interactions. So we have we utilize all kinds of tools such as MasterChef cooking competitions or school-based activities. And thirdly, they also collect research and data and insights and help us design appropriate solutions. So this is the business model we have. This is increasingly becoming digital. I'll talk about that shortly after in the challenges we faced recently. And we have a network now of 16,000 plus entrepreneurs, most of which are women. 75% plus are women. And we've reached about 13 million people. So now this is Dharma Life. The model, was kind of, Katya, you mentioned it. It's been an up and down and learning exercise for me. So my background is I was born and brought up in Germany, and I worked in private equity and investment banking before this, and was doing this for 6 years. Then decided that it's probably more impactful if I try to make a difference and move to India. This was driven by a personal story where I went through a health episode, somehow survived it, and then decided to move to India to do this. In terms of challenges, I mean, obviously, this is a model where at the last mile, there's been a lot of struggle in terms of actually building sustainability for such a model. So we had to pivot a lot. I mean, the latest one being recently, but we did hit sustainability a couple of years ago, and we did this by combining the 3 revenue streams I talked about. And so the idea really is to have a sustainable model which reinvests its profits to scale up further. And the second challenge was, so one was sustainability. The second one was around actually impact. I mean, we started as a gender neutral model. And so what happens is if you're, kind of recruiting entrepreneurs, unfortunately, I mean, only men, a lot of men step forward. So we had a 90% male ratio at the beginning. We, however, went back after a couple of years and started looking at what is the impact we're creating. And the impact for us was, normally, it was initially measured as income. How much income are we creating for the entrepreneurs? But how's the income used later on? So in the survey, what came out was that the money was not really used appropriately. It was spent on themselves when they were men. So it's obviously something which came on in the study generally also. So we pivoted completely to our 10% women and have now made this, I think, 75-80% female-led. So we still work with the men, but it's a female-led entrepreneur model. These are 2 challenges. Obviously the impact challenge, so the pivot on that. I'll talk about the recent challenges, which were around, obviously right now, our model is a physical model, right? We had some digital enablement through apps, etc. But we had to, over the last 3 months, completely pivot everything to digital-led. So we have, it's still work in progress, but at least now we have been able to operate all our core modules. The behavior change program happens on Microsoft Teams with girls on the video chat, and similarly group meetings, digital sessions, all through the technology available. Data bandwidth has drastically improved. So this has been the latest pivot, and we are using this now to help kind of preventive communication around COVID with our partners like Unilever and others. So that's kind of where we are at this point, and that's the latest pivot. I'll stop here given the time in 5 minutes, but yeah, I'm sure there'll be more time to discuss for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Gaurav. And we're going to take some of these lessons around digital leapfrogging, etc., in our second round. But what we've heard as well from you, but also from Lei, I think the support system, the networks are essential to entrepreneurs like you. And we have Suchi with us today from Andy, from the network, which is supporting entrepreneurs, but also corporates and others in that whole ecosystem, and really helping to provide a flourishing and thriving ecosystem for entrepreneurs, which is essential to make everything what you just described a success. So Suchi, in the spirit or in the context of time, I'm not going to say much more about you and your exciting journey, but it would be great if you could share a little bit with us what makes a thriving ecosystem for entrepreneurs in the Asia Pacific, and are there any kind of trends that you are seeing, not only because of COVID, but in general in the region that are worth being highlighted? Over to you, Suchi. And I see you are happy, but don't forget your happiness level.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm one of those who's kind of ambivalent, Katya. Well, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining in. I was at that 5 and 6, right? I think it's more because given the current context, one wonders, and I think we have sort of much work to do. Maybe it's also because of the gray hair, and I don't have much of that passion and enthusiasm that Lei brought. But I think I'm very hopeful. In terms of the ecosystem, I think you had many of what constitutes the ecosystem in your video, right? You talked about finance, business support, policy, creation of markets, human capital, infrastructure, R&D, culture. And I think to your question of what creates a thriving ecosystem as far as this region goes, the word comes from the biological ecosystem, right? And therefore, I think it's also as complex. And for a thriving ecosystem, it needs all of these various sort of aspects and entities to come together. And as you can see, that's a big challenge. Thank you. I know you said we're trying to create a robust ecosystem by providing support to wonderful entrepreneurs like Gaurav and Lay, we hope. So that's quickly around that. And I think you can get a sense of why it is so challenging, right? Because there are so many different aspects. And just use an example, when Lay was talking about her journey as a woman entrepreneur, she sort of brought up in some ways the barrier of language, right? Which would fall under the culture bucket in some ways. And it's not something that gets discussed too much, right? We don't talk about the barrier that language creates, but for many of us countries in this region, English isn't really our mother tongue. We don't think and dream, and it doesn't come naturally to us. And I think a large section of SMEs, especially at the S end, don't necessarily converse in English, right? And I think by default, in many ways, we create a barrier right there. And that's just an example of why creating this ecosystem, and a vibrant one, is such a complex problem. And I think really needs many of us to come together if we're going to succeed. The slide that we have there, and I think that was the next question, Katya, and I might be jumping ahead. But I think specifically, since we're talking about women purpose-led enterprises, this is data that came up from Global Accelerator Learning Initiative program that we have at UNDP, that's looked at close to 14,000 ventures across the world and collected data, right? And these are the key findings that are specific to the topic of women enterprise, right? Which is, if you look at incubation and acceleration programs across the world, women-led ventures are underrepresented. I don't think you'll see anything that's super surprising here, right? But the idea is to share some of the data that you actually see to buttress many of these things that I think most of us have a reasonably good sense of. Women-led ventures have less investment coming into acceleration, and they appear to be less investment oriented, and we can go into what that really means. But this is one of the key findings that we have. Worrisome is the fact that acceleration alone does not really close the financing gap, right? So once they're done with their acceleration programs, it doesn't necessarily mean they're able to raise significantly more funds vis-a-vis their, the other teams. And definitely that representation within programs has an impact on the gender diversity of applicant pools, right? What this means is, as you can see from the data there, having women mentors and having more women on your selection panel does sort of try to balance things out, but it's really unclear what methods actually really help women-led ventures grow. So as you can see, probably more questions that the data has thrown up than answers, some that we hope to try and address. So a lot of follow-up work. One of the things, as an example, that we're trying to do is we put together a fund to answer one particular part of the many questions, which is, what are the models of support that we need to put in place for women-led enterprises or women entrepreneurs to actually get them to be able to get more of this funding, right? And that's just an example of, there's a lot more work that actually needs to be done on that front, but this is the summary of what we find. And I will pause there because I'm not sure where we are in time.
It's great. I didn't stop you because I think it's really important to really sketch this picture of the whole ecosystem. Thank you so much, Suchi, and also the data, which I think is really helpful, particularly for us as well to design solutions moving forward. But speaking about the ecosystem, I think one player who is really important in the ecosystem are obviously governments, regulations. And I'm really pleased that we have not governmental representative itself, but that we have Ms. Trong Di Nam Dang with us from Vietnam, who is the founder and director of the Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Vietnam, and a long-standing partner of the Youth CoLab, but has been working a lot with the government in Vietnam. And interestingly, shared with us that since 2014, if I'm saying something wrong, Ms. Thang, you're going to correct me, but since 2014, Vietnam is recognizing social enterprises as specific enterprise. And yet, since that time, since 2014, the number of social enterprises is about 1,000 in Vietnam and has been stable. So, despite of this progressive or of this recognition, it seems that there's not many more social enterprises moving into the space. So, Ms. Thang, I would love also to hear and get your temperature this morning in Vietnam. But it would be great if you could share with us a little bit more around the role of governments and what you have been learning in your long experience working in Vietnam in this space. What's their role, and how's the current status of this from your perspective?
Okay, thank you, Raja. Good morning. Actually, it's afternoon already in Vietnam, and it's hot here. It's 40 degrees, and we feel very grateful because everything is open except the border. And like looking in our friends abroad, things are still closed, and we feel really grateful. Back to the social entrepreneurship here in Vietnam. For the last 5 years, there's two things that affect a lot the development of the sector. The first one is in the 2014, the government unleashed the social enterprise as in the enterprise law that if a social enterprise need to register as a business, and they need to have a clear social environmental objectives and reinvest at least 51% of profit back to serve the social and environmental objectives that they committed. So according to the regulations in Vietnam, social enterprise must be a business. So for the last 5 years, up to really after 5 years, we recognize now 1,000 social enterprise. So actually, the number is not stuck. That means it's a grow, a steady grow from 2015. That's when the law come into effective up to now. And at the same time, in 2016, the government defined the 2016 to 2020, and with the vision of 2025 as the startup nation period. So the government invests hugely to the technology-based startup and a development of the entrepreneurship in general, innovation and entrepreneurship in the country. So actually, the social business, purpose-led entrepreneurship, benefit from these two government policies: startup nation period and the enterprise law. Actually, yesterday when preparing for the event today, I just think, okay, I need to compare between the performance of social enterprise in Vietnam with some champion in the region, and I think of South Korea. South Korea is kind of like Asian hub in terms of developing social innovation and social enterprise, and I see like in 2017 when South Korea is celebrating their 10 years of social enterprise law, they recognize 1,700 social enterprise. And they currently have now 6 million business in the private sector. And in Vietnam, we have 1,000 and 1,000 social enterprise, and with less than 1 million business. So actually, in terms of percentage, it's not that small. And also in 2018, actually, this is about social enterprise. But in 2018, I conducted a research, a country mapping with UNDP and University of Northampton in UK, and we conduct research on the social impact business. That means the one who might register as social enterprise, but many others they did not register as social enterprise, but they claim like they balance between making profit and making positive impact on social on environment and society. And we estimate about 4% of business sectors. That means that accounting for 22,000 social impact business in Vietnam. So actually, these for the last 2 years, CSIE, my Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and UNDP, we work a lot on promoting the social impact business definition here in Vietnam, and now even the government start to use the word in their policy forums, because social impact business, it's more like aligned with the government policies about promoting technology-based startup. So we are creating with UNDP, we're creating the Impact Tech Fest, which is the national showcase of technology-based business startup here in Vietnam with impact focus. So since 2018 and up to now, every year we run that kind of national showcase. And in terms of the ecosystem, we have many key players who are quite active, and each of the players play their roles. Like we are under universities, national economics universities. So we work with British Council, and myself, I sit in different advisory groups to ministry, government programs about entrepreneurship and startup. So we work with British Council and Ministry of Education and Training to embed social innovation and social entrepreneurship into teachings at your own university in Vietnam. With UNDP, we work with Ministry of Science and Technology to create, competitions, incubation program, and also showcasing Impact Tech Fest. And some of the other key players, they like Oxfam and CSIP, they work with promoting inclusive business. So the key thing now, this year we are reviewing the effectiveness of the 5 years on social enterprise law, and we expect that for the next years we can advocate for more favorable policies for social entrepreneurship sectors in India.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tang, and having so many people in the panel that are working with entrepreneurs, I'm going to kind of repurpose the agenda a little bit, because we get some questions which are fitting, and we wanted this to be a conversation, right? So, Ms. Tang, there's a question for you. Speaking about legal services, can better access to legal advice and solution help remove some barriers faced by SMEs to achieve their objectives, and also on how to get potentially into better legal advice, how to make this accessible for enterprises?
So this is a question for me, right?
That's a question for you, yes.
Okay. Yes, actually, the legal advice is still a big problems here for SMEs and social enterprise, because most of the SMEs and social enterprise, they are micro business, and they are one man players business. So most of the SME founders, they don't have legal backgrounds, and also taxing and finance background, accounting backgrounds. We try to this is the efforts that we are trying, is a kind of creating a kind of one-stop shop for as a public service for social enterprise here, because even here in Vietnam, the Vietnamese government recognize social enterprise as a type business, but there's no financial incentive offered specifically for social enterprise. Legal advice and how to register and how to enjoy some kind of potential incentive as a social enterprise still a big question here in Vietnam.
Katja?
Yeah.
Can I just sort of jump in to add
Sure.
on top of that from the, since you had sort of an ecosystem lens and, asked me what will it take? I think an example here is something like what the Thomson Reuters Foundation are offering through this offering called Trust Law. So what Trust Law does, it looks at crowdsourcing pro bono legal services that they offer free to nonprofits and social enterprises, right? So that I think is a very powerful example of how people can come together in the ecosystem to offer something that is of need. And I do know that Trust Law operate as far as the Asia Pacific go in Hong Kong, India, and Thailand. And I'm sure they're not the only ones. They're just an example of, but particularly around this question of legal, because it's certainly one of those things that is a significant barrier, especially if you look at our ability to understand legalese, and for women entrepreneurs as well. So that's a trend that we're seeing. That's an area that many, many entrepreneurs request for and want support in.
Thank you so much for contributing this, Suchi. I think that's what we want, is giving very practical advice here, right? To help and support. I'm gonna kind of try to complete the ecosystem. So we have spoken about law, we have spoken about the entrepreneurs themselves, the support network that Andy is providing. About who we have not spoken yet is the bigger corporate and businesses, the multinationals, but also the local bigger businesses. And I'm pleased that we have Catherine Kirschenmann with us from the Do School. I think the name says it all. It's an organization that really does stuff. And what do they do? And Catherine can allude to this a little bit more, but it's basically really connecting bigger companies and entrepreneurs together, and with an overarching mission around driving purpose, sustainability, and inclusion. So Catherine, how does that landscape look like? We speak a lot about social entrepreneurs. What about purpose-led companies or companies and sustainability? What are the trends we see there? And also, I know you're very frank, very open when we have conversations, but what are kind of the hurdles and the barriers for connecting entrepreneurs and multinationals together, or other bigger companies? Over to you, and I know it's early in the morning, so I don't expect you to be the freshest and the happiest in Germany, but over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Katja. Well, I think in terms of happiness level, I'm somewhere between Suchi and Lei. I think I do see the challenges, and especially in the current circumstances. But I think it's great also, again, in this panel to hear Lei, to hear Garaf, and to see how entrepreneurs are particularly, able to pivot in times like this to really respond and help overcoming some of those challenges. So I think that's super encouraging. And so to go more into your question, Katja, to look at the large businesses, and as you say, with the Do School, we're working with both. And there's a couple of trends that we've been seeing over the last, I would say, 2 years to really come together on the side of the corporates, which are encouraging, and I'll get there in terms of what that would mean for SMEs and also for purpose-led entrepreneurs and businesses. So one we're seeing is that there's more and more pressure being put on large corporates to be part of the solution and not to be part of the problems. And this pressure actually now is coming from a lot more angles. So employees are starting to really speak up, and they're doing it partly very publicly. Just in the last days, we've seen engineers from Facebook resigning publicly and also speaking out on Twitter against certain decisions that were being made by Mark Zuckerberg. So this is, just one example of how employees are putting pressure on their employers in terms of being sustainable, being part of the solution. This is also something that customers are demanding a lot more. And it's also something that increasingly financial markets are picking up as well. Like we've seen prominent examples like BlackRock, for example, putting up pressure from investor side, which I think is really, really important. So that's one trend that we've seen, and obviously corporates understand that they need to react to it on all levels. There is also another trend, and I think that's good news for companies who have been purpose-led for a longer time, is that by now we really have the evidence and the data coming up that purpose-led large corporates are more successful in the long run. So there's kind of this business case for purpose that people were waiting for to see, and we see that there's a higher brand value. See that there's higher employee satisfaction associated with sort of higher level of purpose. And so I think that's very encouraging for companies to really approach that road if they haven't done so already. And then I think at least here in Germany, and I know in a couple of other countries as well, what has happened, especially in the last 12 months, I feel there have been numerous companies that have come out with publicly announcing really ambitious sustainability goals around carbon neutrality, for example, around circularity. And I think that's great because, of course, it puts a face to public debate, but also, in a sense, those companies are really committing to reaching those goals. And often those goals are long-term goals. And I think the core question is for the companies then, how do we start now to build solutions for goals around, say, we want to be carbon neutral in 10 years, but you have to start now. And I think that's for me also the point where I see sort of the link to, to small business and entrepreneurs, because companies need new solutions. And of course, they're investing a lot in innovation. They see sustainability now also as a driver for innovation. But they also still need a lot in terms of building their own strategies, their own structures and teams and knowledge. And so what has happened, and I think I see really big potential, is to actually turn to purpose-led enterprises, smaller scale entrepreneurs who are really modeling those solutions, and if brought together could actually really harness those opportunities of collaboration with entrepreneurs. So I think I see that all these trends actually contribute to the need for solutions, and there is really interesting solutions in the market. So how do we bring them together? And that's probably the biggest question. And sorry, Katja.
No, I was just wondering if you would like to share more very concrete example on that, since we are planning more kind of round one and two of questions. So happy if you would like to go ahead with that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's the example here, and I'm obviously more than excited to talk about it. So because as I said, often there is a lack of access, and there's also a lack of education of how to even talk to each other and how to come together to scale solutions that are already in the market. So how can entrepreneurs and large corporates work together? And so the industry disruptor is one of those attempts to do exactly that. And we have launched this initiative. It's open for application. So for everybody out there who is working in as an entrepreneur, leading sort of a small enterprise. So it's an opportunity where we really want to create access. H&M has just signed up as first industry partner. So this is happening in the textile and fashion industry first, but the model could be applied to any industry. And it's a way where we're sourcing interesting enterprise solutions and then bring them together with industry partners to find collaboration potential across the value chains. But it's obviously also about mentorship, about capacity building. And I think this is one example where we can show, and we've just closed the early bird applications, and we're now in the second round of applications for another week or so. And we just see the amazing potential of entrepreneurs of all ages. So I'm very excited about that as well, who come in with solutions, who are eager to scale, and who will be empowered through that program.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing this. And just for everyone, we're going to post the link also in the chat for interested entrepreneurs in the audience, but also for other corporates who might want to replicate this model into another industry or into another country. Really welcoming your outreach here, and we're happy to work with you together. I would like to just kind of add a little bit of spice into our conversation and not make it sort of a second round. But obviously some of you have mentioned the impacts of COVID on entrepreneurs, particularly on women entrepreneurs and on youth entrepreneurs. So what I just would like to do moving forward is just giving a couple of data points from interesting research that the Youth Collab has been undertaking, and also UN Women. I just want to say these are all snapshot analyses and rapid assessments, so far from being a sort of deep study, but sort of what we have seen is actually interesting as well in the youth space and the women's space. And I think to no surprise, companies or entrepreneurs have seen significant negative impact on their businesses. And I think this is true to all of the SMEs, or to many of the SMEs. So I don't think that is only for female-led or youth entrepreneurs. I think the important thing is that very of these businesses are more fragile and don't have the resilience yet than many of other businesses. But we also see, particularly from a female entrepreneurship perspective, a lot of women are obviously drawn into unpaid care work, taking care responsibilities, kids not being in school. Unfortunately, we see in the region that anyway already overproportional burden on women is just increasing through the crisis, and it doesn't stop in front of female-led or female-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. So they have a double impact here. And what we also a number which I was quite surprised about, or not surprised, but shocked actually about, is the low access to tax reliefs or special governmental packages or other support. I mean, there was early on research from the Youth Collab, but only 9.5% have reported that they got access to some of these additional resources. Now, what I'm not wanting to do, because there is such a positive vibe, and I think what we see also, there are positive signs, and we have heard from Lei, and we have seen, and we will hear from Garaf even more about how to really translate the crisis into an opportunity as well. And moving on, I think the Youth Collab has actually done something really smart, using their so innovative and creative network, and supported them, worked with them together to really come up with solutions that are supporting society on different levels, supporting the access to basic needs and essential services. Really kind of Lei, it's a good model or a good example of this, and really supporting authorities to provide information and to track information. There are interesting and amazing entrepreneurs out there that have digital platforms on mental health support. And I think I've seen even corporates here in Thailand using some of these entrepreneurship solutions to support their employees. So I think a lot of this innovation is needed right now. And it's great to see that the Youth Collab is supporting that energy and that innovation. UN Women has also done similar things in India with the government of India. We have just recently launched an entrepreneurship challenge for female entrepreneurs to come up with COVID solutions or new business ideas to address some of the needs that come out of COVID. So there is some positive elements out of that. I just going to give a couple of questions from the audience, but also to some of you that we had looked at before. I think, Garaf, I would like to really turn it to you, because you have shared initially that you had through the crisis a sort of leapfrogging moment and transferred or translated your whole business model from being a very physical, face-to-face, interactive model, paper-based ordering, into a digital enterprise, or a really digital-enabled enterprise. Would you like to share a little bit more how you took this as an opportunity for Dharma Life?
Sure, thank you, Katya. So what we did is basically we found our entrepreneurs who are village level leaders. They were bombarded with questions. There was a lot of fear from the communities, and they were kind of being asked what to do. I think because they were looked at as kind of an influencer in that village community, and so they came back to us, and this came actually from the village entrepreneurs. They said, "Well, can you help us with something we could do productively in this situation?" And because there's a general sense of fear, uncertainty, and all the other points which are coming with the COVID crisis, and kind of also while the government is doing a lot of communication, there's a lot of conflicting communication and misinformation as well. So what we then decided was initially after a lot of kind of brainstorming, because the risks are very apparent. Obviously, there's a lot of risks for them as well as kind of in general for wrong communication. So what we did is we aggregated some of these points. We went back to our core partners and kind of brainstormed and created a small kind of village alliance. B4 Village Alliance, it's called. We'll be launching this further soon. And we focused around 4 areas. One, can we use our entrepreneurs to digitally disseminate information which is credible, identify misinformation and kind of talk about that, play it back to the government and be a communication channel? Number 1. Number 2, we aggregated essential goods and services needs and requests, because a lot of times supply chains were broken. And we basically aggregated the needs, and we then filled them with the supply chain. We were lucky enough to get permits from the government to deliver even in this situation in a contactless way. The third thing we did is we also then went out and kind of started researching different groups. So you've all probably seen the migrant issues on the ground in India with people getting stuck. So we started doing video interviews with all different kind of stakeholders, and then played that back as well to the resources. And the entrepreneurs are kind of essential in this, and the tech piece, we enabled them on our apps and on video conferencing platforms. And data bandwidth was strong enough to do a video interview with the migrants. So I think there's crazy pictures, but in that sense, and that we are now disseminating through our research partners. So this is also, to your point on ecosystems. We're able to create a small ecosystem with government, with research partners and corporates, Unilever, LBS, and School of Economics, etc. And and then finally, we're using now going forward, we're actually plugging into other NGOs who have built apps and which can be used for specific challenges like mental health and gender violence. So we're trying to do that next, right? But this is just a very, very quick snapshot. It's still work in progress as much as you can do it in this situation. And but at least it gives the opportunity to the entrepreneurs to survive and thrive somehow in this situation as much as possible. And this was all done with social distancing and norms in mind, so people didn't have to move. So whether it's WhatsApp or other platforms, we used them.
Great, thank you so much, Kawaf. I think it's all about resilience building of your models, right? I think to be prepared in the future. And I think I'm just echoing some of the comments here that we get from the audience. Amazing kind of solutions and how flexible and fast enterprises are. One for you here. I really just kind of read that out. It's just amazing. I'm so impressed with you. So I think it's good to give that feedback as well. I think there's an interest in your technology, the AI technology, and a question about, do you see other use cases for this technology that can be scaled into the future? Any sort of other areas where you see this growing to?
So one important work that we are having right now, aside from digital triages, was our work with UNDP Philippines on using chatbots as an innovative tool to for household social impact, to conduct household social impact assessment surveys among low-income households. Mm-hmm. And we have done this with co-ownership with a large CSO network in the Philippines, because we know that there are barriers right now, like for example, social distancing, ECQ, we're on the lockdown, so we can't really get surveys or do the enumerators and randomization in low-income communities. So what we did was, because we designed the chatbots to resonate with low-income households, and then the questions there were taken from UNDP's HSEA library as well. And we've devised it such that it's going to be experimental. So we've done A/B testing, etc. So I think that's one way to scale it.
thank you so much, Lei. I don't want to do matchmaking, but I think, Gaurav, there's something to be learned about what Lei is doing in your business model as well. So definitely that's going to happen, I guess, after this panel. There are a couple of other interesting questions coming from the audience. And there is one to Catherine, actually, about corporates, So one, maybe we're gonna start off, and Catherine, is one good for you as well, but anyone else can jump in here, Suchi maybe. So we are obviously at the Business and Human Rights Forum, and there are a lot of UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And SMEs are so often overwhelmed with a lot that they have to do and have on their plate and to make their business run. How could we provide support to SMEs to comply to these guidelines for business and human rights? Or maybe even Ms. Tang, I think that could be a good one for you in Vietnam to answer that as well. Anyone?
So, I mean, maybe a starting point, I think, to be honest, it's probably a very easy one, but start with creating awareness. Like, a lot of the social entrepreneurs we're working with don't have this top of mind even. So I think making it part of the capacity building to create awareness and to probably share best practice and then help to work towards that step by step, because I think that often it needs time and it needs discussion, it needs learning, and as I said, and as you mentioned as well, there is, like, especially when you're starting out, there's so many topics that you somehow need to handle and can be quite overwhelming. So I think just starting to raise awareness early on, and then build from there. And happy for everybody else to build on that, maybe.
I might, if no one else wants to answer, just maybe from a UN perspective, also adding on to this. I think we do a very similar exercise right now, working also with Suchi, with Andy together on understanding how can we add a gender lens to a lot of enterprises that are in Asia. I think it's a bit the same thing. So we have started to put together more sort of a guiding principle, but in a very easy way. So UN Women has what we call the Women's Empowerment Principles, which is designed for medium and bigger sized companies. As a set of 7 guiding principles and with clear actions. And we're trying to kind of distill this now into a very sort of 1, 2, 3 guide for enterprises to add this gender lenses. To your point, Gaurav, you said you started gender neutral. And I think that's what we see with many enterprises in the region. Not that they don't want to add the business and human rights lens or gender lens, but it's all about simplifying this and making resources easy, accessible and implementable. That's one observation that we have. But if someone else wants to add in, happy. Otherwise, I'm gonna move on to some more questions from the floor. Okay, so I'll going to do this. Lei, there's another one for you about next month. There will be a lot of young people in the region be graduating, and what would be your recommendations and key success factors that you can give them to join your ranks as young entrepreneurs?
As what I've mentioned earlier, it's always a journey from a small self, and then you take steps to have a bigger self. And in order for this bigger self to happen, you have to continually challenge yourself to have to expand your horizon. And with this, after graduating, I think joining youth leadership networks, volunteering and community works allows you to have a deeper understanding of social complexities, allows you to develop soft skills as you get along with different people coming from different backgrounds. So then you also become a better leader and a better have better sort of management in how to make decisions. And I think these are great foundations in finally taking that jump to be an entrepreneur.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I also agree with Lei, because here in Vietnam, startup is a kind of movement, and for the advice to for the one who graduated this year is that I found like impact startup here, they open a lot of call for internship and also career newbies to work for the business. So yeah, you can, instead of set up your own now if the market is not ready yet. So just start your career with work with impact startup already, like in their earlier of establishment. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tang. To the audience, get ready. We're gonna have a question for you in a minute as well. So get your Menti devices out already. But before we're gonna be doing this, I'm gonna use two more questions. So one is for you, Sochi, more around the ecosystem and different players in the ecosystem. Why is the bulk of government financial interventions go to help big firms and to banks, to stock exchanges, and why is there so little help and resources going to SMEs? Kind of maybe switch this question into, is there something what from your research and from your experience you are seeing as well, Suchi? And if so, any sort of reasoning behind that from your perspective?
Right. So, and I'm going to give you a very honest, at least what I think is an honest response to that, right? Because I think it centers around the perception of risk. Right? So governments work with public money, and the belief is that larger corporations are less risky. And this is kind of mimicked in the entire fundraising process, right? So you've got large exchanges for them, not too much happening on SME exchanges, right? And I think the pointer is to sort of have, therefore, the SME ecosystem get together, right? So that you have the ability to be able to speak for yourself and represent your point of view. That's one. But I think the other is also the message that I think in general that the SMEs should try and pick from what they see is, our best practices. So how do we seem less risky? What can we learn from corporations in terms of, across the board, how we fundraise, how we report on information, maybe push for having more active SME stock exchanges. There have been attempts, I know, across Asia, but they've not really been nearly as successful. So in a sense, learn from there, learn what's good, try not to learn what's not so good, I think is sort of the only message I can give out there. But I think the ecosystem recognizes that as well, Katya. So what we're trying to do, especially since we're talking about the impact ecosystem, right? There is this recognition that SMEs are very cash strapped. The impact SMEs are cash strapped. So what can we do? And that where they are, what they seem to want a lot more is access to debt than necessarily equity. That's not to say that that's not a problem. And I think they're trying to address it through various means. They're working with corporations to see how we can bring sort of blended finance instruments and other ways. We have non-banking financial institutions being called into the conversation to understand, how they can reduce the cost of raising capital and make it available at rates that are more affordable. These are some of the things that are happening. I will acknowledge we have a long way to go, but I do believe that there are, sort of good, there's good momentum that is being built in the region right now. And I do think that COVID will sort of push these ecosystem players to do more.
Thank you so much, Suji. Since we have an investment banker in the room as well, or previous one, anything to add on this, Gaurav, from your perspective?
I think one of the key things we have seen on the ground is access to working capital being a massive issue. So from our entrepreneurs, we've been hearing, and even from small shops in the surveys, that they're deploying their working capital by giving credit and supporting the community a lot of times. And then the cycles are kind of gone at the moment, right? And we see this also in the microfinance space in India, where, given the moratorium, these cycles are kind of stopped. And both on the business side and on the small kind of borrower side. So I think that's one of the key issues where, while the government is doing a lot now, it still is reaching and it's taking time. Whereas on the positive side, the government support on the food side has been mostly, in our experience, great. And I think I spoke to 100 people or so in the last few weeks, and everyone got their government their rations of food. So I think you have the two extremes: the business kind of working capital challenge, the food side. I think the government is still stepping up and hopefully reaching, improving their speed. That's what we see in India at least.
Well, I think that's obviously always, and I think that's for me an interesting learning in this crisis also, that we have been conducting lots of sort of stakeholder interviews and rapid assessments with different stakeholders, government, bigger businesses and entrepreneurs, and the speed by which the entrepreneurs are operating is just amazing. I think you can really kind of see the spectrum from the innovators and just testing and being not risk averse, taking mistakes or making mistakes. But then I think what you also see, interestingly, a lot of the solutions that come out of this are taken on by bigger companies or medium-sized companies even, so to just make them bigger. And by the time it comes to government, it takes some time, but then it comes into the system, right? So I think there's a role for everyone to play, but I think it's really important to see this role of the entrepreneurs in this crisis, and I think that is for me sort of a temperature check also for the future. I think and I hope that stakeholders are seeing this importance of entrepreneurs showing the future and showing the way and paving the way for new innovation that are more inclusive and more sustainable. And by this, I said it already before, we want to make sure that we get more of these entrepreneurs supported in the region. And we want to use the high number of people participating today actually to have a little other Menti question for you. So get up your menti.com. We're going to just display the code again. And we're going to have a question to you. What is needed from ecosystem players to particularly support young and female entrepreneurs in Asia Pacific? And again, as before, one or two words so that we kind of see a little bit where the temperature is, and we can use this to also feed this back to the wider ecosystem. We see stimulate creation. There's a question, what are ecosystem players? We've heard, so the governments, the role of governments. Sorry, actually that's the right point. I think we use a lot of jargon always. So governments, the role of companies, the support from NGOs, UN agencies, etc. So personal networks, so equal opportunities, teamwork, government buy-in, access to finance, policy by governments, mentorship incentives. So I think we have a really good set of input from your side as well, which we're going to be taking forward in really including this in our recommendations that we are sharing and discussing with the wider system that is working on entrepreneurship. So thank you very much for really this input from your side. But obviously before closing, I'm not going to just close it like this with your input. It would be great if we could get our panelists the last time, before I'm going to thank you, to kind of give a very short statement. I know that's difficult sometimes, but one key message that you would like to get the audience or take the audience away from the session, or any advice or anything what you would like to share with the audience before we close it in 2 minutes. And I'm going to start with Lei, who is beautifully on my screen, very big right now. So Lei, over to you.
I think something that I would like to emphasize that I haven't shared a while ago was if there's any silver lining, because we have seen unprecedented growth because of COVID-19 opportunities and the way we were able to pivot and just provide value during this crisis. I think what was really remarkable was because of the crisis and we're all on Zoom, we became less young and female. We became just a voice, and the products has started to speak for itself. So I suppose the barriers about, judging that, the person in front of me is young and female sort of was gone, because when we were talking with government officials, with bigger tech startups, all they can hear is my voice and the products that we're producing. So I think that helped a lot in removing that barrier in this crisis. And last note would be courage. I think courage, just to push and believe that if you continually challenge yourself, but also manage that with skills and continually bringing value, I think it goes a long way.
Thank you so much, Lei. Over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks. And building on what Lei just said, definitely sort of from Do School perspective, speaking to both sides, first to entrepreneurs, or also the question came up about people graduating now. We believe in doing, like, you will only grow the skills and the mindsets and the confidence whilst you're in it. You don't grow that from thinking about it. And so definitely the encouragement to get out there, and if you're passionate, if you want to create change, then start, and you will grow in the process. And then for the larger corporates, just make sure you don't underestimate the opportunities that are in collaborating with small and medium enterprises, with entrepreneurs, with innovators, to bring new solutions to life. And I'm hoping that this will become a lot more the standard in sort of, creating new solutions going forward.
Thank you. Suchi, you are the next on my screen.
Sure, thanks, Katya. You said one thing, right? And I'm going to focus on the issue of women and gender. I'm going to try and keep it simple, so hopefully people will remember. If there's one thing that I believe that you can really try and do, is just collect gender disaggregated data. Ask yourselves every time you're doing something, what is the impact this has on women? So whether it's women as employees, whether it's women entrepreneurs, just one thing, it seems simple, but I have seen so many folks in the ecosystem and entrepreneurs still not do gender disaggregated data. So one message, gender disaggregated data, please.
I'm gonna undersign this one. Ms. Tang, over to you.
Okay, so actually I'd like to talk to all the youth who are studying in universities and all the universities out there in the region, because seeing our role in the ecosystem as the ecosystem builder, I strongly believe like the universities can play a significant role in connecting the dots, like connecting all resources here, because you have infrastructure, you have the knowledge, you have the young people, you have the alumni networks and infrastructures, location, everything you have. So universities should play a very important role in building the ecosystem for social entrepreneurship in the region.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tang. And Gaurav, I think you are the last on my screen for a final word or statement.
I think I would just say that despite all the complexity, uncertainty, and negativity, it's important to stay positive and survive and thrive. Pivot your model, whatever is required. Just be persistent and at the work. That's it.
Thank you so much. There was a nice closure. What I'm trying to do is I just gonna wrap it up very briefly with what you have said and bring this together in 5 things. So I think the first one, be digital. I think without your business model probably will have a problem in the future. Be brave and do things. Be connected. And here we mean connecting universities, private sector, bigger corporates, networks. Be connected with each other. Be gender sensitive. and stay positive and happy in all what you're doing. Thank you so much, everyone, for such a great panel, the panelists, but also participants for sharing your insight to the level it's possible in a digital format. We're definitely gonna take this forward.